Hi everyone and welcome back. Next thing we are going to talk about data fetching mechanism in Next.js application, and we'll talk about Next.js build also, how it works. Okay, so first let's see Next.js build. We will run Next.js build npm run build. Okay, so it will take some time to create a production optimized build. Meanwhile, we can talk about, okay, let's see what is the error. Error occurred without a component export default. Found feeds without a React component as a default export in personal blogs. Okay, yeah. Export default posts. Okay, we can actually remove this for now. We're not using this particular page. Okay, and we'll do it. I mean, default export was missing from that page, and we are doing a build. Here you can see these set of pages, right? We have the blog ID. Okay, first of all, the APIs. So if you see the API hello.js, so it will be exposed through this API hello, and then we have blog and ID. So if you just try to see how it works, like you are passing something in the blog, hello world TK Sharma. We have stopped the server. Let me just do this npm run dev. So this is our build output. Here we can see the API hello, and then blog ID. So this is ID you can pass as a dynamic, and we are using higher order component with router. So you can use router, you can use with router. With router, inject the router in the props, and from there you can use props.router.query.id. We are just doing destructuring and getting this only from router. Okay, let's see, our server started and we can see something. Okay, yeah, hello world TK Sharma, right? Whatever you are passing here, that is becoming available. And here we can also check on API. Hello, this is the basic REST API we have added, right? Through the next API routes. This is how it is working. Okay, next thing which we are going to talk about is important aspect, which is the data fetching mechanism in Next.js, and this is divided into two parts. So first we will talk about static generation and server side rendering. Then we will talk about how many ways you can do a data fetching, like get server side props, get static path, get static props. Okay, so static side generation is of two types: static generation and another which we call as a server side generation, rendering or server side generation. Okay, static generation means where you have these simple pages. You are not dependent on any particular data. This is coming from the routes, and it will just replace it. About.js, here it is having some kind of a JSX, right? It needs to be built once, and same data will be published every time. If you see the build, you can see these HTMLs has been generated in the .next folder. If you see the pages, and in the blog APIs, here we can see the static content. Okay, the chunks and the pages. Inside the cache, inside the server static cache, we can see the fixed set of content is getting generated. You can see these many files in the chunks. So if you see the pages, right, these blog pages, contacts. So static content, we about page, right? About has some default styling content, right? So if we just take a look on about.html, so here in the server pages, okay, let me just run this again. Build, so it should generate a build for us in the next folder. Okay, so automatically generated as HTML CSS, you can see this. So here all the content has been generated inside the next folder. You can see the manifest file. Here is our server, init server all the pages. You can see these pages about.html, index.html. So these are HTML ready pages. You don't need to compile and all these things. You just need to send it to the client side. So that's why we call these pages as search engine optimized, because we are sending directly HTML. They might contain the meta tags and SEO tags, which will help for search engine optimization. Okay, so as we discussed, this is divided into the two parts. One is a static generation. If your component is not having these methods like get static props, static paths, then it is just HTML content. You will compile it once and the same content will be rendered every time. Okay, now we'll talk about get static props. So sometimes what you want is, before publishing a particular page, you want some data to be published onto your page so that you can supply that data and render the content from the data. So I will just take a look onto this particular example of blog ID. Okay, what we are doing here is we are using get static props. What get static props is doing, it is making an API call. It is a way to make an API call. You can actually use get static props and populate the data in the props. So using this, I populated the data in the posts and I'm just iterating on to it, right? So this is how you can just generate the data and then push that data to your component template. So get static props, get static paths, right? So when should you use get static props? For data fetching. The data required to render the page is available at the build time. So whenever you are doing a build, here we need to actually put some placeholder. So let me just find a JSON placeholder API endpoint. Okay, we can get it from the available, which is available on the websites. Some kind of a dummy REST APIs, to-dos or anything should be fine. At the build time only, it will actually try to get the data for this. So here there is an actual API call has already been made and this particular data has been fetched in this blog. So if I can just try to look into this. If we got something like this, blogs id.html, here I converted that into, okay, let me just remove this. And we'll see this. Yeah, so you see this blog.html page now. You can see all the blogging content is available, right? This particular HTML has already been generated. So that's what I was going to talk about is, when you are using this get static props, what it is doing is it is making the data available for your template. It is actually site generation task it is doing. It is fetching this data content and making that data available to your blog. So we are rendering the title and all this HTML is now readily available. Okay, so now another thing is, now we got the understanding why we need get static props. We need it when we want data to be HTML ready. Either you are getting it from a headless CMS or some kind of a cache data which is not changing frequently. That data also you can fetch it using get static props. So in the last video we talked about get static props. Okay, so static props and static path both will be needed if you are actually rendering a dynamic page based route like in the blog id.js, right? And you wanted to do the pre-rendering of these dynamic routes. When I say pre-rendering, that means is whatever the data we are getting from either to-dos, we already know the IDs and we are allowing only those set of IDs with the help of get static paths. Means we already know the data set size, we already know what all IDs are going to come when you use this method. So we are saying is whatever the IDs are going to come from this route, I am going to allow only these IDs for this routing, right? If you are passing something else, then it will just break, right? So this particular array of paths are only allowed. We will pre-render only these set of routes at the build time. Okay, fallback false means if you are passing any other route, then it will go to the 404. and get static props is doing nothing but it is whatever the id you are passing in the props, right, in the params.id it is getting, and it is just fetching this data and passing it in the props and making this data available to the component. So this static path and static props both should be used whenever you are actually rendering a dynamic routes. Okay, so these are get static path and get static props are important. Next one is get server side props. Okay, so now we understood this, what is the importance of these, and these are happening at the build time, so that whenever the HTML page is getting rendered, it has everything what it needs. But things can be different for get server side props. Okay, so how it look like if I just talk about the method definition. This is how get server side props look like. It also has a context and it is returning the props. So if you are returning any data in the props object, that data will be accessible inside this post component. Okay, so this context parameter is an object and it has all these different things: request, response, query. You can look at in the Next.js documentation what actually it does for us. What it is doing is we can actually use the same set of code with whatever we are writing in the get static props, because it is returning the props, and we same thing we are doing here. So let's try to remove this code, and what we will do here is return simple h1 for now. Okay, we are not using the posts which we have rendered. So get server side props, how it is different from the others. So we should use this get server side props only if you need to pre-render a page whose data must be fetched at the request time. Okay, because once the page is available and then we are making a call, it's not like we are making a call at the build time and generating the whole HTML content for it. That is not happening. So if I just do this, and if I just render the HTML template based on this by just iterating onto it, means we got the posts. So then now we can actually do the rendering of the post using some iteration. So what I'm returning is post, it is post.map, and in this placeholder URL what we are getting is, at least we can put ID and title if we are getting both of these things. It should give, I guess. So we are getting we are not passing any route parameter here, we are getting only to dos. So we are getting title and all these things, and it's not a dynamically rendered route. It is simple index.js. So it will be rendered with the help of /blog only. Export default post. Okay, so this is get server side rendered props, and we are just making a call. Okay, so server must compute the result on every request. So that is, you can say, you can disadvantage, or but this is the use case where every request, whenever you are hitting, this call will be made, and we will compile and we will evaluate the HTML what need to be rendered. Okay, so here we are not pre-rendering the HTML content, because this particular request will be made on each client request. Okay, so once the request page, this page directly execute this get server side props for at the request time, and the outcome of this particular page will be rendered. So this is all about, I mean, you can talk more about this in the documentation. This is mostly server side rendering. Whenever the request is being made, we are making a call and getting the data and compiling this and returning. Okay, thanks everyone. In the next video we'll talk about all the CSS support which Next.js is providing. After all these things are done, once this is done, we will actually build hacker news and a simple YouTube or weather application, and we'll use all these concepts of get server side props, get static props, and get static paths in there.